Welcome to Let's Eat. I'm your host, Emily, holistic health coach and self-proclaimed wellness enthusiast, here to meet you at the intersection of physical and mental health, the exact location where optimal wellness lies. This podcast is meant to explore all areas of mind and body wellness, designed to offer you the integrative knowledge, behavioral strategies, and mindset shifts necessary to uplevel your health and feel better today. We'll explore nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care and stress management, habits and routines, gut health, mental health, and more. I am so happy that you're here. Welcome to the table. Let's eat. Hello, world, and welcome back to Let's Eat. I am recording this on a Monday morning, and we are feeling all sorts of motivated and inspired and ready to go. Yesterday was one of our very first days that were beautiful and sunny. Lou and I went for a run, and it was everything. It was everything and more. I think this year in particular, I am more excited for the warmer weather. I'm more excited for the summer. I'm not sure why. Maybe I say that every year too. Like this year, I'm really, really excited. But it was just so nice to be outside in the sunshine, to the point of it feeling hot, honestly, which I will say, when it comes to running outside, I am so particular about the weather and the circumstances. It has to be warm. I cannot stand the feeling of cold air in my lungs. I think I also just have some sort of intolerance to it. I really do not understand how people run in 30, 40 degree weather, even 50 degree weather. Like, it needs to be warm. And I would prefer to run in the heat of the day than when it's a little bit chilly, or, I just feel so uncomfortable. And I don't know if it has something to do with my lungs or what it is, but the pain and discomfort that I feel when I run and it's cold out, I don't know. I wonder if I'm alone in this, but I have a lot of respect for people who run in the colder weather, or even, this is so embarrassing to say, but even in like 55, 60 degree weather, like my lungs cannot handle it and I don't feel good and it's not enjoyable. So I'd rather inhale like the heat. And I used to run, when I used to run more, that would be when I would run, in the heat of the day, which is probably not safe. But I don't know, I just would prefer it. And now I don't run nearly as often. Even yesterday when I was running, my knees started to give me issues, which is something that I've dealt with for several years. And even Lulu, my girl, she's going to be 7, and she was slowing down. We got to like 2.5 miles and I could tell she wanted to lay down. I was like, oh no, my little girl. Usually I do with her between 3 and 5 miles, maybe. If we hit 5 miles, which is not very common, usually between 3 and 4, which is, totally fine. And that's my limit and my cutoff. But yeah, I'm very particular about the circumstances that I can run, which is okay, because then I'm not running as frequently. But I do plan to run more in the next several months as the weather becomes more consistent, maybe once a week, because I just love the way I feel. I love listening to music. I love running. I love the way I feel after I run. It's just a different type of feeling that you don't get from any other type of exercise. And I'm grateful for my Peloton, because obviously cycling is much less of an impact on my joints. I learned that the hard way, especially working in the restaurant industry for as long as I have and not wearing proper shoes. My poor joints at 29 are probably the joints of like a 70-year-old, just because I did some work on them. So once a week, that's what we're going to limit ourselves to, but it's nice to get outside. Lulu loves the running and the swimming, and it's just a nice activity to do outdoors. And then I'll reserve the rest of my workouts to be on my Peloton or on my mat with some weights, and keep it pretty low intensity or low impact. So for today's episode, we're talking about deficiencies, and what I find to be really important that I want to showcase here is, number one, I don't think that we acknowledge deficiency enough in our healthcare, in our health. And deficiencies lead to dysfunction, and then dysfunction leads to disease. So I want you to remember those 3 Ds, right? Deficiency leads to dysfunction, and dysfunction leads to disease. Some health experts argue that most disease is driven by deficiency. And this is a really important topic to discuss because of that, right? And there's a number of reasons why we're so deficient, and it's not the fact that we're not supplementing properly, which, yeah, that's part of it, but there's other issues that are more foundational that are happening that maybe aren't commonly considered that are preventing our body from utilizing the nutrition, number one, or even consuming it in the first place based on the quality of our food nowadays and so forth. So I'm going to dive into 5 reasons as to why we're so deficient and then what we can do about it subsequently in order to promote better health. So to rattle off some statistics here, 9 out of 10 Americans are deficient in potassium. 68% are deficient in magnesium. I would even argue that that number is higher, but we'll stick with the 68%. 1/3 of the population are lacking in zinc, 75% are lacking in folate, 8 out of 10 are deficient in vitamin E, and more than 50% of the general population are vitamin D deficient, which I would argue, again, that that number is higher. Vitamin D and magnesium are 2 of the most prominent deficiencies. I don't have omega-3s listed here, but we are certainly deficient in omega-3. The last that I read, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio ideally should be 4-1. We've demonized omega-6, but we need a healthy balance between omega-3s and omega-6. So the ideal ratio is 4-1. Unfortunately, within the standard American diet, we look at 25, even upwards of 50-1 when it comes to that ratio. And that's driving inflammation. That's such a big issue because omega-6 is found in a lot of our processed foods, a lot of our packaged foods, because it's a lot of those industrial oils that we're seeing that, are rich in those omega-6 fatty acids. And then the omega-3s are coming from our fatty fish and our nuts and seeds and so forth, which we're simply not getting enough of. So just to kind of paint a picture for you to understand, just generally speaking, what we're looking at in the population and how imperative it is for us to understand how essential it is that we're getting this nutrition and how unfortunate it is that we're not, based on obviously the following reasons and what we can do moving forward in order to better support our bodies and our minds. So first things first, I think this is an obvious one, but the reason that we're so deficient is the standard American diet. Now, for those of you who don't know what the standard American diet is, it is the processed food, the ultra-processed foods, the fast foods, the trans fat and industrial oils, all of the commonly found foods within the diet of most Americans. Now, the standard American diet is largely devoid of whole grains and fruits and vegetables, and as a result of that, devoid of any type of nutrition, right? So obviously, if we're not consuming the foods that are nutrient dense, what do we expect to happen? And it's unfortunate because, number one, a lot of these foods are food-like substances. That's oftentimes how they're referred to as being food-like substances, not actually food. So compositionally speaking, they're obviously not going to have nutrition in them if they are not even derived from real food. And then secondly, when foods go through processing or they're manufactured or they are preserved, when they go through this process of making them shelf stable or making them just into the food that, we know today, a lot of this nutrition is stripped away from the food itself. So one can simply make this assessment of if the foods that we're consuming are not even food, right? If they're food-like substances, they're not going to contain the nutrition that we need. And then even further, through the processing, through manufacturing of these foods, we're also stripping the food of any type of nutrition that might be there. And it's funny because I just shared this statistic this morning actually on Instagram. 63% of America's calories are coming from processed, refined foods. And I believe it's 25% then that's coming from animal-based foods. And then 12% are coming from plant-based foods, which to some extent, that's encouraging, right? At least 12% is coming from plant-based foods. But then if you read the statistic further, it says, yeah, but half of that 12% is coming from French fries, because French fries are technically a plant-based food. So when it comes to plant-based foods, which is a whole nother discussion to get into, right? Because there's a lot of foods out there are plant-based. Are they nutrient dense? Not so much. But 6% of those calories are coming from French fries. So that means that lasting 6% is what's coming from fruits, veggies, nuts, and seeds. And that's just being hopeful. That's being optimistic. So when we think about that and we're thinking about how much essential nutrition our body needs, that is not going to suffice, right? So the standard American diet is really inhibiting our body's ability and our mind's ability to access the nutrition that they need to optimally function. And then obviously as a result, we're talking dysfunction and we're talking disease. So our next reason that we are so deficient is largely a factor that's outside of our control, right? And that is the quality of our soil and how food is grown and raised. What we are unfortunately faced with in our world now, within our country, is the fact that our soil is much less mineral dense, much less nutrient dense than what it was several years prior, right? Decades prior. And this is because of how the soil is treated. It's because of how the animals that we're consuming are raised, and how this is then compromising the fact that we are a consumer of these foods, of these animals, and it's then impacting us as consumers and in terms of what our brain and our bodies have access to. So this is essentially very frustrating because we could be eating lots of good stuff, right? We could be eating all the real whole foods, and that's not to say that that's wasted, right? I never want to suggest that. It's certainly much better for us to be consuming these foods than maybe other types of foods, right? But because of the change in nutritional value, we're just simply not getting the nutrition that we used to, right? This was a non-issue thousands of years ago when our ancestors were hunting and harvesting, and there wasn't the concern of glyphosate, right, which is a massive, massive issue, especially the threat that it poses to our health. There was no use of antibiotics or hormones. It was largely very untouched because there was just no existence of them, right? That none of this existed. And while I'm a proponent for organic as often as possible and really understanding where your food comes from and so forth, I think too, the use of glyphosate and antibiotics and hormones and all of these methods that have evolved allow the food production to keep up with the population. And like I said, in no way am I justifying the use of antibiotics and hormones and glyphosate and herbicides and all of that in relation to our food, right? I'm certainly not justifying that. I know that the implications that come along with that on our health are massive, and I think we all need to be a little bit more conscious of it. However, without the use of these new methodologies that evolved, we likely would not see the production of food that we see nowadays because it's on a much greater scale. This mass production would not be possible without the use of some of these farming practices, without the use of some of these techniques that are necessary in order to support mass production. We're no longer simply providing for just our community or just our family. We've kind of abandoned ship on that, understandably so, right? Obviously, in an ideal world, I'd love to be able to raise all of my own food and my own animals and so forth, but that just simply does not exist nowadays as often as it used to. And so utilization of these practices have evolved in order to support larger growth and larger production, but obviously we know that there are health complications as a result of it. So just back to the original point of speaking on the fact that the quality of our soil and how our food, both animal-based and plant-based foods, how it's all grown differs than what it was several decades prior, several centuries prior, and we have to be aware of this in relation to nutritional deficiencies, then obviously as well as choosing better quality if we have the means, if we have access to the better quality food. Now that's a whole different topic, right? But for the sake of this conversation, when it comes to deficiencies, we have to understand that the quality is just significantly different. I know specifically conventionally raised cows is significantly different in terms of omega-6 to omega-3 content in comparison to grass-fed, grass-finished cows. And like I mentioned before, right, there's that imbalance, that ratio that exists. And when there are grain-fed cows, which are largely omega-6 dense, you're going to see that in the quality of the meat. Versus a grass-fed, grass-finished cow who's getting all the omega-3s from, grazing on pasture, on grass for the majority of its life, for all of its life, you're obviously going to see that reflected in the quality of meat that you're then consuming. So Keeping this in mind, food is just different in terms of its composition. I like to explain this when it comes to someone who really wants to get all of their nutrition from food. I had a client one time who said, I want to be completely off of supplements and I only want to be consuming foods to get my nutrition. And I feel very strongly about that. I myself really try to promote a diet and to consume a diet that most of my nutrition is coming from the foods that I'm eating, because ultimately getting the nutrition in its real whole form is much more bioavailable for the body, and ultimately is just my personal preference in terms of nutrition and ensuring you're getting a large array of diversity in vitamins, nutrients, and minerals. However, I also believe that supplementation is necessary in a number of ways because of the fact that it's simply just different. So some of the more common deficiencies, or say for example, magnesium, that's almost always something that I talk with clients about, or is recommended that to be supplemented with, right? Or is reflected in blood work as someone being deficient, right? Simply because magnesium being a mineral, we're just not seeing the density in our soil like it used to. And then that's reflected in the plants that we're eating and so forth. So really understanding just this concept of how the quality of our food is simply different. And this is standard American diet aside. Healthy foods, right? More healthful, whole, real foods. Still much, much, much better for you than choosing more inflammatory foods that are commonly found in the standard American diet. But also the consideration that the food looks different compositionally is a consideration that we have to take when it comes to our health and it comes to deficiency. Now we can dive into how our body is utilizing the nutrition that we're consuming. The phrase that comes to mind, and the one that I use commonly, is you aren't what you eat, you are what you absorb. And you'll hear this used time and time again with individuals who promote the importance of healing your gut, gut health, digestion, stress, and so forth, right? This is something that I talk about quite a bit. And the body is incapable of absorbing, digesting, making use of nutrition when it is constantly activated, right? When we're, significantly stressed out, when our digestion is impaired due to gut issues, and so forth. So you could be eating the most nutrient dense diet, all the fruits, all the veggies, all the high quality grains and quality proteins and healthy fats and so forth. But if your body is not in a space to utilize this nutrition, it's not going to be able to utilize it. It's not going to be able to take advantage of the fact that you're eating all the good stuff. And even though you think you're doing all the right things, what's going on the inside reflects otherwise. So a few reasons why this might be the case. There's a number of different examples, but what it really boils down to is what's going on in your gut. And first and foremost, stress and digestion go hand in hand. We know that a lot of anxiety issues overlap with IBS or other digestive concerns, right? Irritable bowel, indigestion, constipation, and so forth. And that is because the nervous system is directly connected to our gut. It's directly connected. So you think about, when you are super nervous or you feel a certain way, you might have, a knot in your stomach, or when you are really stressed out, maybe that's impairing your digestion. Maybe you have to give a presentation and maybe you are unable to go to the bathroom, or you can't stop going to the bathroom, right? There's a number of different ways that there's that overlap. And what's important to consider is that stress, even if it's not maybe in the outward stress that we think of when it comes to psychological stress, or we think of financial stress or relational stress, those are stressful. But just simply living in our modern world has a number of stressors that accompany it that can pose serious compromise to our gut health. And if we think about it, if my gut is not functioning the way that it should, if my gut and my body and my brain are interpreting danger in any way, if I'm interpreting the fact that there is stress present, my digestion is not concerned about absorbing and utilizing nutrition and breaking down food properly. It's not worried about that right now. It's worried about, am I safe? Am I going to survive this threat? And while we might not be facing a tiger, while we might not be facing a bear, or while we might not be actually, in a threat towards our survival, evolutionarily, our body doesn't know any different. Reading a stressful email or hearing a baby cry or getting in an argument, all of these stressors build up and impact the body just as a actual threat would to our survival. So you think about over the course of the day, how many of these stressors do we encounter? How many times do we find ourselves sitting in traffic and then getting to work and spilling coffee on our pants or whatever, right? Getting in an argument with your boss or your coworker, and then getting a bad performance review, and then getting home and fill in the blank. Okay, I don't need to give the examples, but all of these examples demonstrate stressors that are keeping us in the chronic activated spot. And not only that, some of the more non-traditional stressors that impact our bodies and our brains: eating processed foods, not getting proper sleep, sleep deprivation, not moving our bodies, having an unhealthy relationship with blue light and technology, scrolling social media constantly, obsessively. There are a number of non-traditional stressors outside of just the ones that we commonly see that are also placing stress on the body and then as a result on our gut health. So really keeping this in mind as you navigate your day and as you navigate your week to week and your wellness and so forth is understanding about that direct connection that's there, and that you could be eating all the right things, but if emotionally you're navigating stress, if you are holding on to any kind of stress, if you are not sleeping or you're not exercising or whatever the case is, this can be overly stressful on the body and then impact your digestion, which then impacts your ability to absorb the nutrition that you're eating. Other issues with gut health, just general, say for example, food allergies, or like I said, chronic stress, dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of good and bad bacteria, leaky gut, which is a big issue. I personally went through overuse of antibiotics. That was something that I navigated, and my poor gut, was a mess as a result of that, leaky gut, all that havoc that can be done by, a lot of use of antibiotics when we're wiping out all of our good bacteria. So there's a number of different influences on our body's ability to absorb. I wanted to really showcase the stress piece because I think that's the most relevant, but there's also a number of other issues that can take place related to our gut and our digestion that also put us in a space of compromise. So when it comes to navigating your wellness journey, it's really important that you're aware of this piece to the puzzle, because you might be having issues within your gut and you're trying to take supplements, you're trying to eat right, you're trying to do all of these, good in theory practices. But at the end of the day, if you're not going a little bit deeper and acknowledging the fact that your ability to absorb and utilize this nutrition might not be optimal, that would be something that you need to address first and foremost and then move on. Not to say that you should ever say, well, my body can't absorb this right now, so I'm just going to eat whatever I want, right? No, you should still be eating real whole foods, because that inevitably is going to reduce inflammation within the body, which can also drive up an inability of our body to utilize nutrition effectively. So we always want to be prioritize anti-inflammatory, which means eating real whole foods in comparison to more processed foods, but then also taking a step further and understanding the fact that, all right, is my absorption where it needs to be? Is my digestion where it needs to be? What does my gut look like, and how do I need to attack it based on my personal circumstances and my body in order to be most effective and in order to utilize the food most efficiently? Next consideration when it comes to nutrient deficiencies, nutritional deficiencies, and so forth is our dietary choices and limitations, or following certain trendy diets, or being a vegetarian, being a vegan, and really understanding the factors that come along with that. I think we've over-glorified plant-based diets, we've over-glorified veganism and vegetarianism, and we haven't really considered the fact that there are some considerations to be made when we are choosing to eat this way, and it might warrant us to supplement in a way that would be important for someone who's following a vegetarian, vegan diet, that someone who might be eating more of an animal-based, plant-based, or balanced type of diet wouldn't have to consider. For example, B12. B vitamins in and of themselves, I think this is something that's not considered enough, especially in a world that is so heavily saturated with stress and medication. Both stress and medication deplete our B vitamins, and our B vitamins are so important for brain health, for immune health, for gut health, for every part of our health. So when we are in a space of stress or we are using medication, especially medications like birth control, we are more at risk for depletion of this nutrition within the body. So that's just a simple fact for anyone to know, to consider how our lifestyle, how certain things that we're doing or we're not doing are impacting our nutrient levels and so forth. However, when it comes to B12, majority, if not all of our B12 is coming from animal-based foods. So meat and eggs, animal-based foods. That's where we're getting the majority of our B12, unless we're supplementing otherwise. But what's not considered is the fact that if you are vegetarian or if you are vegan, you are at risk for not consuming sufficient B12. And is this considered? Is this emphasized enough? No, it's not. And B12 is so critical in our overall wellness. It is, related to our energy, it's related to our metabolism, it's related to our brain health. And, considering this in relation to your preferred diet, your preferred nutritional orientation, and so forth, is important when making these choices. Even deficiency in B12 has been found to create or drive symptoms of depression, which I find to be very fascinating. So understanding how choosing these certain approaches to nutrition. Obviously, everyone's entitled to eat how they want to eat. A lot of times there's ethics behind choosing a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet, or it's just preference, or you've been raised that way, whatever it is. That's totally fine. I am not in a position to tell someone to not eat a way that they want to eat. However, I am inclined to emphasize how important it is for you to understand what type of nutrition you are not getting if you are consuming foods that do not contain the nutrition that you need. So this is an important consideration. Similarly, when we're talking about something like a vegan diet, vegan diets and veganism has been really healthified and romanticized in our world. When I first started my Instagram, this was back in 2018. That was probably one of the most common questions, and probably is still the most common question that I get from people. Oh, are you vegan? Do you follow a vegan diet? And I'm number one confused, like, why is that the assumption, right? I think we've just kind of paired veganism with healthy. My sister and my brother-in-law were vegan for several years. Now that they have my nieces, they still follow veganism, but not as closely as maybe they did when they didn't have my nieces. But what we know about this misconception when it comes to veganism and its close relatedness to being more healthful, and this is not to say this is relevant to my sister and my brother-in-law, this is simply just a general fact, is there's a lot of vegan foods that are out there that are considered vegan, and they contain no nutritional value, they are ultra processed, but they're vegan. So they are a green light for those who practice a vegan lifestyle. So what we know, unless you are a plant-based vegan or you're someone who really closely follows real whole foods and veganism, most vegans, a lot of vegans out there are really unhealthy, metabolically unhealthy, and have issues in relation to their health because while these foods are considered vegan, they are also nutrient devoid and so forth. Now, being vegan means there's no animal-based or animal byproducts found in the food itself. So when we think about the term food-like substances, we could argue that of course there's no animal-based, products in there because it's not a real food. It's a synthetic substance. It's something that's derived in order to create the food. Say Oreos, for example. Oreos are vegan. Oreos are dairy-free. Oreos can be gluten-free as well, which I know that that's like the latest in the Oreo world is there's gluten-free Oreos now. Do we think that they are more healthful now because they're gluten-free? Do we think that they're more healthful now because they're dairy-free or because they are inherently vegan? No, they're not. But, that's, I think, what the issue is a lot of these vegan foods are glorified as being more healthful, and in reality, they're not. So now I've gone down a whole tangent. But this also begs the need to consider the fact of our original point of how processed foods are inflammatory for the body. That's going to compromise our ability to utilize the nutrition that we're consuming, and we're simply not getting the food and the nutrition that we need in order to optimally thrive. So this is all interconnected. This is all related. It's all, it's all considerate of the fact that the food is simply not where it needs to be. Our digestion is impaired, and now we're deficient as a result of it. So if you are someone or someone follows a vegan diet, follows a vegetarian diet, like I said, everyone is entitled to their nutritional orientation of preference. I personally think that if you can back it up with reasons why you're doing it based on research or, whatever the case is, then follow that argument. That's totally fine. Everyone's different. Everyone's body is different. So that's an important consideration to make. However, I think it's also important that you do your due diligence in understanding, okay, when I'm choosing to eat this diet, am I more vulnerable to certain deficiencies as a result of it? And really understanding that before you dive into any particular dietary orientation, so that you're best equipped to supplement accordingly, to do what you need to do in order to avoid deficiency. This one's huge. This one is really, really huge because not only B12, but when we think about protein as well, say like this massive macronutrient that we all need, that we're all under consuming, we're not seeing complete protein sources in plant-based foods like we do in animal-based products, animal-based protein. So when you think about that, if we're not getting all the amino acids that we need in order to optimally function, amino acids are the building blocks of our bodies, of protein. That's how protein is broken down into the body, or in the body rather, into amino acids. If we're not getting the essential amino acids that we need, we really have to understand, all right, what composition of foods do I need to be consuming in order to be sure I'm getting all of these essential amino acids? That's super, super important. And not only that, something like iron. Iron in plants is much less bioavailable than the iron that's found in animal-based foods. So when you think about that too, our body's ability to utilize the iron in animal-based foods differs from that of plant-based foods. So keeping these nuances in mind and these intricacies that exist within the plant-based versus animal-based lifestyle argument is an important consideration when you are navigating your own nutritional journey. That's not to say that one is better than the other. That's not to say that I don't think that you can't still be healthy on a vegetarian or vegan diet. I think there just comes a level of complexity that needs to be considered. Now, for those of you who know me, you know that I eat a predominantly whole foods diet. I would not consider myself plant-based at all because I still consume poultry, meat, fish. I have dairy. So I can't necessarily say I align with vegetarianism or veganism because I don't operate in that way. That's just not how I approach my nutrition. However, when it comes to someone who is choosing to eat more plant-based and so forth, it is an important consideration to make in order to be sure you're getting all the nutrition that you need in optimal levels and ultimately following the diet that helps you feel your best. I think that is really what's important. If you're on a plant-based diet for, say, 6 months and you feel horrible and you feel terrible, think about that. Think about what that might mean. Think about what the symptoms are trying to say to you. Now, like I said before, right, you can have all your reasons as to why you're following these diets and why you're following a certain way of eating and so forth. But I personally feel that the greatest indication of whether or not something's right for you is how you feel on a day-to-day basis. What's your mood like? What's your energy like? What's your focus like? Your sleep like? And really being willing to look at those factors that essentially create our quality of life and decide, is this right for me? Or even further, okay, maybe this is right for me, but do I need to supplement? Do I need to be more aware of the nutrition I'm not getting? Because this might be the driver in the symptoms that I'm having. This could be creating dysfunction, and I could be eating all of these, more healthful foods, but if I'm not getting the nutrition that I need, is that compromising my digestion? Is that compromising my hormones? What is it that is driving these symptoms that's making me feel not so good? Or do I need to re-examine the way that I'm choosing to eat and maybe make some changes? So this last factor in our deficiencies is essentially a sum up of all the ones that I just mentioned, but it's simply just a lack of awareness and education. We just do not know how to eat. We don't know how to eat. It's a driving force for all of the previously listed examples as to why we're deficient. And we're just not aware of how important it is for us to get a wide array of food, to add in lots of color, to get enough protein, and eat our healthy fats. And it's unfortunate, right? Because it's simply just a lack of awareness and a lack of education. And it doesn't matter what type of lifestyle that you lead. It doesn't matter the nutritional orientation that you choose. If you're vegan, if you're vegetarian, if you're paleo, whatever it is, does not matter. But as long as you are aware of, okay, if I follow this approach to my eating, right? If I follow this nutritional protocol, and this applies to someone who just decides to eat more real whole foods, right? It doesn't have to have a name. I personally don't care for the labels and so forth. However, for the sake of this example, we'll just talk about it in labels. If I'm following this practice, if I'm following this way of life, what does this mean for me to be sure I am eating everything that I need to be eating? Now, unless you're working with a health coach or working with a practitioner, you're not going to have this information just handed to you, certainly not from your doctor. However, and I say that not as a general statement, right? Not all doctors are not going to suggest this and give you guidance and so forth. However, most doctors within our Western healthcare aren't concerned about the nutrition because it's simply not how they're trained. But if you are choosing to subscribe to a certain type of dietary protocol, are you doing enough research behind it to understand what you might need in tandem with choosing to live this way? And this goes for just understanding your own personal health, your own personal circumstances. I personally did genetic testing last summer, and I learned that I have a heightened need to supplement with B vitamins, specifically methylated B vitamins. So now I have a B complex that I take every day. Now, this obviously just came with the fact that I did genetic testing and I learned a little bit more about my health and what I have issues with and where I might need more support and so forth. So it's been really, really helpful for me to understand that and then to supplement accordingly. But for just a general consideration as it relates to certain types of nutritional orientations and so forth, do you know what it is that you need in order to support that orientation, support that way of life, so that you're not missing out on the key essential nutrition, you're not missing out on, important vitamins, nutrients, and minerals that will prevent you from falling into a deficiency. Education is so important on any type of journey, but especially a wellness journey. And, by understanding this a little bit further based on your own circumstances, but then also based on how to eat properly, how to build your plate, what colors you need, what we should be doing on a day-to-day basis to ensure we're getting the nutrition that we need, this is huge. And we're simply not taught this in school. We're not taught this in our healthcare. So doing that work for yourself is going to transform the way you feel. For example, I'll just give a little example from my life. I add 2 Brazil nuts to my smoothies every day. 2 Brazil nuts, that's all it takes. We're, throwing back handfuls of Brazil nuts, that can be toxic. However, adding 2 Brazil nuts ensures I get enough selenium and enough magnesium for my daily required amount. That simple trick to give my body the selenium and magnesium that I need to function, I forget what the exact percentage, I think it's like 1,000 times the amount that you need or something crazy like that. If I just add that to my smoothie, I'm already giving my body a punch of nutrition that I wouldn't have otherwise had, and it's such an easy hack to do. So really understanding how valuable it is to educate yourself on what your body needs, what's important for gut health, what's important for your hormone health, what's important for energy production, your brain health, and so forth, so that you can optimally function and thrive. That is one of the best tools that you can adopt along your wellness journey, instead of just having someone say to you, oh, maybe you should take this, maybe you need that. Really doing the work for yourself and understanding what it means, that is so, so invaluable. Something else I want to add and touch on briefly in the spirit of supplementation and deficiencies and so forth is the fact that when we look at RDAs, recommended daily allowance or recommended daily intake, we're considering RDAs as being just the level you need to avoid deficiency. Now, I think this is something that we don't often consider, we don't know as general knowledge, but I think it's important to add into this episode for the sake of being more equipped to understand how to read supplements and understanding what that means. So basically, when we see those RDAs on the back of any kind of supplement bottle or supplement that you might be using, we see, oh, this is 300% your daily value, or, 48%, or whatever it is. We have to consider the fact that that is simply just to meet deficiency. That's not necessarily for optimal health. So oftentimes when we see those numbers, we also have to consider the fact that the amount that it's recommended is typically much more. There's much more needed in order to get to a place where it's optimal. Now, we have to consider what I had just said, right? When it comes to deficiency, there's a lot of factors that are preventing us from getting to optimal health because of stress, because of toxins, because all of these things that are causing depletion of our nutrition in the body, which is now also not being met if we're supplementing with something that says the RDA is X and we think we're getting enough. I'm hoping you're following me here. So with that in mind, we also have to consider and take out our kind of critical consumer goggles and say, all right, based on my age or based on my gender or based on my circumstances, what is ideal, what is optimal, and how can I get that through supplementation, through my diet, in comparison to what maybe the bottle says, or, oh, well, I'm getting enough from here. For example, I'll just give one example that I talk about quite a bit. If we look at a multivitamin, most multivitamins are really devoid in, or not devoid necessarily, but they just don't have a large content of minerals. Multivitamins are multivitamins. They're not multi-minerals. So if you look at the mineral content on your multivitamin, on any multivitamin, you'll notice that the mineral content is pretty insignificant, right? In comparison to maybe the vitamins that are present. So for magnesium, for example, this is something that I see a lot. You'll see there's 25 milligrams of magnesium, 50 milligrams of magnesium. Typically speaking, the magnesium content in a multivitamin is pretty insignificant. And you might look at your multivitamin and say, see, look, I'm getting all of these. I'm getting all of these nutrients, all of these minerals and so forth. I'm good. This is covering all the bases. Now, I do believe that multivitamins are wonderful for what I like to call nutritional insurance, where you're kind of getting this baseline level of nutrition every day consistently to ensure your body's getting at least some nutrition. Now, I also believe that you cannot out-supplement a poor diet, so a multivitamin should be supplemental to already eating a well-balanced diet. That's a whole nother topic. When it comes to magnesium, ideally we should be consuming 300 to 500 milligrams just as a rough estimate. And if you're only getting 25 milligrams a day, you're not getting what it is that you need. You are at risk for deficiency. On top of the fact that magnesium is easily depleted by stress, magnesium's involved in hundreds and hundreds of enzyme processes and reactions within the body. I mean, magnesium is essential. And so, just taking that into consideration when you are choosing a multivitamin or you're choosing your supplements, and understanding that it might not be as easy as, oh, I'm just taking a multivitamin, I'm good to go. There's more complexity to it. And this is something that I personally would recommend working with somebody who can support you in this journey, whether it's a health coach or a functional practitioner or integrative health doctor, someone who has a little bit more grasp on this whole concept, I think would be really valuable in supporting you on your journey. I myself am a certified dietary supplement professional, so I work with clients a lot on supplementation. So, really finding someone that can navigate this with you, I would suggest is being your best option so that you're not wasting your money and you're not taking supplements that are BS, and which a lot of them out there are. It's very much like the food industry, which is a whole world of chaos and confusion and misleading marketing and all that. So that would be my suggestion there, is really being aware of, yes, supplementation is important and supplementation is valuable, and I use it personally. I suggest clients use it and so forth, and it's a valuable method to supporting deficiencies. However, at the same time, you really want to be smart about it, intentional about it, and use, your most critical consumer skill set to best navigate that process as a whole. So as a quick recap, let's run down the list of reasons why we're so deficient. First and foremost, the standard American diet. Now that is, I personally believe, the biggest issue. It's also a driving force for inflammation. It's a driving force for our gut dysfunction. It's a driving force for stress. So All of the factors that I just listed thereafter are also influenced by the fact that the standard American diet is so prominent and we are over consuming it and so forth. So, standard American diet, food is stripped of its nutritional value, and it's also devoid of any nutritional value because it's a food-like substance, right? A lot of these processed packaged foods are not actually foods. I think it's Dr. Michael Greger who calls them food-like substances. Secondly, the quality of our soil and how our food is grown in terms of animal-based foods, and how our food is raised in terms of animal-based foods, and the quality of our soil in terms of harvesting plants and so forth. I'm using those two words interchangeably, so forgive me there. Grown and raised. How our food is grown and raised is simply just so different because of the chemicals that we're using, right? Glyphosate, herbicides, the antibiotics and the hormones and all of that we're using on our animals. The way that animals are fed, grain-fed versus grass-fed, pasture-raised versus non-pasture-raised, right? Cage-free, all of those terminology that we see on our egg cartons and we see on our packaged animal-based proteins and so forth. We have to be aware of how this is impacting our health, but especially when it comes to the quality of our soil, we have to consider the fact that it's simply just different than what it was years and years and years ago. And with this mass production of food nowadays, we're not seeing these smaller farms, and buying local is kind of a thing of a past. Luckily, I think it's coming back a little bit. So side note, if you can, choose local, support organic, local, seasonal food as much as possible, right? This can kind of offset the impact of buying foods that are mass produced and the chemicals and the raising practices and the growing practices and so forth that might be there. But the mineral content of our soil is simply just different, and the way that we raise our food, very different. Lots of farming practices and techniques that have an impact on our health. Nextly, the body is incapable of absorbing, digesting, and making use of the nutrients that we eat nowadays because we are not what we eat, we are what we absorb. In a world of stress and leaky gut and autoimmune and antibiotics and so forth, our gut health is just a total mess. And we can be eating all of the right things, all of the good foods, but if our body cannot absorb the nutrition that is being consumed, right? If the food is being broken down and we're unable to take advantage of the nutrition, then we're not actually able to nourish because we're not digesting, absorbing, and assimilating properly. So this is important consideration in relation to the standard American diet, in relation to stress management, understanding your gut health, and more. Next, if you are following some sort of dietary lifestyle, right? Your dietary choices are maybe, vegan or vegetarian, or you have limitations in terms of what you're eating nutritionally, this can also put you at risk for deficiency in some ways. I rattled off a few examples. The one I was using was B12. So really understanding if you follow some sort of veganism, vegetarianism, pescatarianism, whatever type of dietary lifestyle you choose to follow, whether that be for personal reasons, ethical reasons, whatever the case is, just do your research and due diligence in understanding if you might need to supplement in tandem with the diet that you're choosing. Be aware of what this means, what risks this might put you at in terms of deficiencies if you're not eating meat or you're not eating this, you're not eating that, and then be willing to invest in those supplements or those additional strategies in order to better support the body. I think we're going into these dietary lifestyles pretty blindly, and it's really important that we are aware of what that means and how we need to better support our bodies while doing so. And then lastly, there's just a lack of awareness and education around all of these things, all about deficiencies and how to eat, what to eat, when to eat. Oh my goodness, we are just so incredibly confused. I hear this all the time with clients who are simply just saying, I have no idea how to eat. That's why I follow this diet, or that's why I've paid for this diet plan or Nutrisystem or whatever the case is, because they feel so overwhelmed and intimidated on how to eat most healthfully that they say, well, I don't know what to do and I have to eat. I have no choice and I need to eat. So I'm just going to eat this structured dietary program because they're sending me meals. I don't have to prep anything. I don't have to know how to do it. It's simply in my fridge and freezer, which don't even get me started, okay? So we're just simply uneducated and confused about how to go about navigating this. most effectively. The awareness piece is really important. If you're following a vegetarianism, approach to nutrition, if you're following a veganism approach to nutrition, whatever the case may be, and you don't feel good, use that as a sign. That's not to say that you shouldn't be following this dietary lifestyle. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is your symptoms are indicative of potential dysfunction or potential deficiency in the body. Now, this is not to say that it's all deficiency related, right? There can be a number of reasons as to why you might be feeling certain symptoms. But I think calling this into question and really being aware of, okay, well, I'm following this lifestyle and I feel this symptom or that symptom, or this is kind of has come about ever since I started living this way. What might be going on? What might be the issue here? Maybe this isn't the diets for you, right? Maybe this isn't the lifestyle that works for you, and maybe incorporating other types of food into your diet will help you feel a little bit more nourished or will reduce the symptoms and so forth. But either way, building awareness around your symptoms when following a certain lifestyle is going to be your best bet. And this is deficiency aside. Just building awareness around what your body's feeling, what your body's saying to you, that is one of the best skill sets that you can develop. And it will allow you to move closer to becoming your best quality, most healthful self as a result. So this concludes today's episode all about nutritional deficiencies. I hope that this brought you a little bit more information and education to better understand why this is a problem and why it's so prevalent. Now, I didn't necessarily go into what nutritional deficiencies can lead to, but just as a general statement, like I said from the start, nutritional deficiencies can lead to dysfunction, and dysfunction leads to disease. So you can imagine that if our body needs all of these components in order to feel and function our best, then you can imagine that without it, you're not going to feel or function at your best, right? I think that that's a pretty simple consideration to have about all of this. Now, not all nutrition is essential, right? Our body can still produce certain nutrition and so forth, but the majority of the nutrition that we need is coming from the food that we eat. And it's just a non-negotiable for us to consider this in relation to our relationship with food, how we're eating from day to day, and knowing that to give our body and our brain especially the fuel and the ingredients that it needs to do its job. And in order for it to do what it needs to do for us to function and for us to feel good, to ward off disease and so forth, we have to be aware of what puts us at risk and what we can do about it as a result of that. So, like I said, I hope that this brought you value. I hope that this brought you a level of awareness and understanding that you might not have otherwise had, and you can take it now into your own life, into your own, nutritional approach and nutritional orientation. Consider it, let it marinate, and then decide how you might have to make adjustments or where this might be relevant for you, and go from there. So once again, thank you so much for being here. I hope you'll come back to my table sometime soon and join me for another conversation around health and wellness, mental health, physical health, all the important things. And until then, be well.